So I'll just start with a little background about me really fast. So I started on a spiritual journey when I was 19, and I started meditating first with TM, and then I got all into Chinese medicine, yoga, Tai Chi, Ayurveda, which is an ancient Indian form of medicine. And then I did a bunch of other things like the holistic health program at San Francisco State. And I did California College of Ayurveda here in California, and then I went to Iowa and went to Marshall University of Management and got a BA again, a second BA in physiology and health, which is very much based on the Indian system of health, actually. And then I got a master's in Vedic science, which is the science of consciousness. That's kind of an interesting subject that Joe knows something about too. And then that was the point at which things started to get interesting for me, because then I finally met somebody who could help me with a lot of things that I needed help with personally in a more like one-to-one situation. And that was not something that we were all getting in Fairfield, since it's a very large movement. So then I started learning about emotional healing, actually, and then I started learning about beliefs. So as far as Druid and, as far as my Druid path, that's about where I started getting in touch with my past life memories of being Druid, actually. And my mentor helped me at that time to kind of contact a guide on another plane of existence for Druidry. And then I even joined a little group in Fairfield that does Druid rituals every holiday of the year. And there's 8 seasonal holidays for Druidry or Wicca, actually. They're very similar. And and we have a small group today, so I'm going to make sure that you guys get enough chance to ask questions and all that kind of stuff too. So then I ended up starting this training to be a bard as part of the Ovates, Bards, and, well, it's the Order of Bards, Ovates, and Druids, which is a British group, and they're actually the group that kind of helped do a lot of organization of the Druid religion kind of in Britain and the British Isles. So they have like a really nice website and everything if you want to look that up if you're interested, if anybody's interested in that kind of stuff. I know, I feel like somebody's going to come in. And
is it all cracked open?
It's not. Should I crack it open?
I'm going to take care of that.
I can. It's okay. You're kind of, yeah. It's actually easier for me to go, but so the bardic training I did mostly. I'm almost done with that. And what happens then is you do Ovate training and then you do Druid training, and it's all correspondence course, so it's not very intense in some ways, but it is actually an inner kind of journey, and there's a lot of training about the myths. The myths have a lot to do with the religion, actually, and the culture. And my original interest was just that I'm of Celtic origin. My ancestors, that's where they come from, so there was definitely some interest to learn about that originally. And then it became kind of more esoteric from there. And so I've done a lot of these Order of Bard, Ovates, and Druid rituals. That we're going to do one of them today just for fun, just for like your education and to really celebrate the holiday, because we are on autumn equinox right now. And I do things on my own, just kind of in a more intuitive way, but this is a very official kind of like organized way to do a ritual that's easy, where we have scripts so that everybody knows what to do. So even though you haven't practiced, it'll like work out okay. And so that's one easy way of kind of practicing Druidry. If you guys ever wanted to create some kind of community group, you can always access those rituals actually. And other than that, there's just principles that we're going to learn today about how to kind of go deeper with this kind of culture. It's a culture, it's a religion, it's a lot of different things actually. It's a whole system of healing. So Wicca and Druidry also are not very different actually, is my personal viewpoint. I've been to some Wiccan rituals. They're very similar to things. So I'm going to go into that a little bit. But I always give out my health model first before I start anything, any class, even though I love just educating and teaching classes. I like to make a point of my health model because this is what I've learned on my journey, is that if you deal with your stuff that's in the middle of those circles, then everything else is a ripple effect out from that center. So if you deal with your beliefs and your emotions, then your energetic body, your physical body, and the collective body of humans on Earth gets better, actually. So when I do any class, I would start with that, just because I want it to be in that context. I don't want people to think that if we go from just the physical, that it can be really, I don't feel it's really that effective on its own, actually, without working with emotions and beliefs, actually. That's kind of my conclusion after 15 years or whatever. And so, because I did a lot of working with the subtle physical, right? I did a lot of like diet and herbs and yoga and meditation and working with, trying to put people into balance physically. And that kind of stuff is really useful on that plane, on that physical plane, but it should be, I think, paired with working with beliefs and emotions, because otherwise you're getting places really slowly. Actually, this is my little arrows here about evolution are like really simplistic, but that's the main idea that I found, is that your fastest evolution is to work with what's going on inside of you first, and then to start working with the outside as well. If you have like a health problem, to work on the physical plane at the same time as doing your beliefs and your emotions, because that usually is almost always where your disease is coming from, is your beliefs and your emotions. So that's the main thing to me. And now we'll continue with Druidry. So let's actually talk about Wicca a little bit first, because there's a lot of confusion. You know, as far as I can tell from my intuition and my studies, Wicca kind of probably came from Druidry. Druidry is the ancient religion of the Celts. Celts being Celts. And I have a better pen I'm going to use my better pen. And what you want, let's see. Some Wiccans might tell you that it's hard to tell, which came first, or if Wicca was actually its own separate thing. But what we know for sure in Western religion is that I can't find my pen. What we know for sure in Western texts, like what the Romans wrote down, for instance, because that was the time where they actually crossed paths with Druids and Celts, right? What the Romans wrote down, was very few and far between and kind of superstitious, and I'll explain that in a second. But, so there was a rebirth of Wicca and Druidry around the 50s, actually. It started in the 50s, but it became a thing in the 60s and the 70s, really. So that's when the major movements that you see now, the religions that you see people, like, being a part of or celebrating or whatever, those things are really from neo-paganism, mostly is how it's called a lot of the time. I'm going to give you Celts and neo-paganism. But we know that witches were burned at the stake also in the Middle Ages, right? And it's widely believed now that they were not, in fact, Satanists the way that they were accused of being, right? And they were almost all women that were burned. It's kind of generally thought that probably they were practicing some kind of magic, or that people thought they were practicing some kind of magic, and that was threatening and scary, which would be probably to the Catholic Church. Anybody who has power, in that kind of Catholic paradigm would be threatening, probably. And the fact that women were really, really, like, at the bottom of the totem pole at that point, too. I'm sure women with power was a threatening concept, so they were prime targets for making an example of, right? So a lot of them might not have been witches, but I think that generally speaking, they were suspected to have something to do with this old religion that this Catholic Church had decided was satanic. And that's a number one. If I can't get anything else into anyone's head today, it, I guess, would be that no, Druidry and Wicca is not satanic. It's like really still a superstition among people. But even in Fairfield, I had a girl like worried and freaked out one time because Anna and I wanted to celebrate Beltane and we ran around with masks on. And that's the kind of thing, like, people, if they were raised Catholic, especially in a Catholic country, sometimes still have a lot of ideas about what this is and what it means. So, okay. In fact, the Catholic Church took almost all of their holidays from this religion we're talking about. So, most of even the practices that they do in the church, like burning incense with frankincense and myrrh, using like any kind of like, holy water is from Druidry originally too. A lot of other things, I think even the priests' robes might have originally, the Druids were white, usually is how they're depicted, but I'm sure that, there's different, all these holidays, Christmas is right after winter solstice, and a lot of the winter solstice traditions are very similar to what the Christmas traditions are now. So anyway, we'll talk about that stuff. But okay, so let's talk about like main ideas of Wicca, and they're almost all the same with Druidry. But so there's different traditions, as they say, right? And they're not. It's very diverse and very like it's not centered in something the way that Christianity is even. It's not centered the same way, like, all Wiccans believe this kind of thing, or all Druids believe this. I mean, Druidry, if you follow, like, the Obod stuff, then you're probably going to do similar things, but otherwise you're kind of drawing on a really, really old tradition. You're interpreting it a little bit.
What's the Obod stuff?
Order of Bards, Oviates, and Druids that I was talking about before. So, okay. So, generally speaking, in Wicca and Druidry, we have God and Goddess. Okay, I think that's important because it's possible that most indigenous religions were like that before Christianity, and Judeo-Christian kind of religions, even Islam, right? There's very few women present in an important way, right? A lot of Wiccans and Druids actually refer to Goddess as the main source, concept of unity, where we come from, the universe, all these things. There's so many ways of saying God, right? But a lot of times they'll refer to the Goddess first because it's an earth-based religion, and it does have something to do with what you see in front of you. It does have something to do with the material, and the material is quite often associated with the feminine, actually, in almost all traditions. And Druidry has deep ties, actually, to ancient India and the Vede and that kind of stuff.
Wow.
So, and it also has ties to the mythical Atlantis, which some of us don't believe is that mythical. In fact, they've found, things underneath the ocean now to prove its existence. But, we have a god and a goddess, so that's a little bit different than a lot of religions now, right? The goddess, it's often referred to as there's a triple goddess, like a trinity. This is interesting, right? Because in Catholicism we have a trinity also. But it's a trinity of Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, right? In Wicca and Druidry, it's a trinity of Maiden, Mother, and Crone. Okay, so the Maiden is, I'm going to use even Ayurvedic ages. The Maiden is like a woman before 30, kind of. And the mother is between 30 and 60, and the crone is after 60, probably. Okay, those are just really generic ideas for you. These all have different functions, okay? In these religions, being older is not considered disposable, okay? Our culture right now kind of looks at the elders as, you know, like, if they can't function the way that the rest of us do, then let's put them in a home or something, get them out of the way, you know? And that's not how the elders were seen at all before. In fact, they were the advisors. And at the point in your life that you would go into what we would call in Ayurveda the Vata time of life, which I can explain that a little bit if you want later. Those are doshas. But when you go into that older, like after 60 kind of time of life, you would become less of a worker and more of an advisor. So all of these are important, and they would relate to these in different ways. And you can break up the seasons, you can break up the year into these categories too. Just like in Ayurveda, you could break them up into Vata, Pitta, and Kapha, actually. And this maiden time is pretty obvious. It would be springtime. The mother time is summer. And the crone is autumn. Now, winter is broken up into either autumn or spring. So the beginning of winter is the crone, and the end of winter is the maiden. So when you get to Enmulk, which is actually also the Catholics' Candlemas, it started as the celebration of the goddess Bridget, and I will read you a Bridget poem today just for fun. And that is February 1st, which is also Groundhog Day, where they figure out what time, you know, how fast spring is going to come, right? Because the groundhog comes out of his hole and he looks at the shadow. That actually was originally, it was another animal, I can't remember what it is. Or it was done with a tree or something. It was something else, but it wasn't a groundhog, but it was originally from a Druid tradition, so. Okay, so then the other major concepts, okay. So, Wicca and Druidry have reincarnation in common with the ancient Indian and some of the Buddhist stuff too. And that's why you can see like some major parallels, like some people might have been originally, you know, traveling back and forth or coming from the same place or something. And there's an emphasis on the 5 elements in both of them. The 5 elements are how creation is created. So, if you want to go from the void, the absolute nothingness place, into this chair, you would have to go, and it says exactly how you would do it in the Veda, actually, from India, but you would have to go through the elements of space first, then air, then fire, then water, then earth. Because you would be getting grosser and grosser, from the subtlest to the gross, and all of those elements help to create the next element. And those are how we come to material, we come to the physical from the, like, spirit world.
So it's
yeah, and
space, air, fire.
Yeah, ask me, yeah, I'm about to write it down. Ask me questions too, guys, because I love questions. But, otherwise I'll keep talking, so.
Okay. Space, air, fire.
Space, air, fire, water,
okay, water,
and earth. Now, some of these sound like, okay, well, you know, it's like you're walking around and there's the ground, that's the earth, that's pretty obvious, right? Water, you've got coming out of your faucets, you know. Fire, you can make a fire, you kind of know what that is, right? Air, can't see it, but we know that we breathe it. And we can feel it when the wind is blowing. And space, that's just more of a concept. We just know that it must exist in order for us to be here. Like, space and time actually have to exist, right? And, so, but what my point was actually was that these are considered very, very subtle as the 5 elements. Even, like, the earth element, even though you would technically be able to see that, we're speaking as a concept when we're talking about the 5 elements, though. And we do use things to symbolize those elements. Like I'll use a rock in a ritual to symbolize the earth element, you know. But it's not quite as gross as it even sounds. It's not quite as material as it sounds. But these are important concepts because if you want to solve your diseases from a physical level, from a subtle physical level, you need to know about elements, actually. Even in Chinese medicine, you would need to know about elements. And in Chinese medicine, it would be slightly different elements. But I find them to be just slightly more material because they still have fire, water, and earth, and they have metal and wood, too. And so that just, to me, it seems like they kind of just kept going. Because I think you still have to have space in order to have any of that anyway, you know? And quite often in Wiccan and Druid rituals, they will use, you know, the middle of the circle, for instance, as a marker of the space element. You know, you don't have something that symbolizes a space element necessarily, you know, because it's really, it's very, like, etheric, but it's also called ether. Depends on who you talk to. In Sanskrit, this would be Akash, and then Vayu, and then Tejas, and Jala, and this one. I don't remember that one actually, but anyway, it's just a fun fact. You don't need to know Sanskrit. So let's do, okay, Wheel of the Year. Wheel of the Year is what we were talking about a little bit with the Maiden, Mother, and Crone. And there's 8 seasonal festivals for both religions. And, I mean, these are indigenous kinds of, like, markers of the year. So you're going to find these in a lot of indigenous religions, actually. You're going to find them in a lot, any earth-based religions are going to have something around that time. Now, it's interesting because if you go to different places in the world, then the sun's going to move slightly differently, right? And you're going to have different seasons, actually. Like, you go to the other, you know, you go to Australia and it's like the end of winter right now, not the end of summer, right? So in that case, that's why you have some variations. But it's interesting to me because you can still see, you know, like Ethiopian New Year is still right around, like right before autumn equinox. There's still all these interesting correlations. So, okay. So then, okay. I think that Wicca is a little bit more focused on magic in terms of doing spells and making things happen in the physical world from physical objects, like taking a bunch of stuff and doing a ritual like we're going to do to make something happen in particular, or taking some herbs and making some kind of charm to increase your luck in some area. I'm just giving you an example, okay? Druidry also has all that stuff too. I think that what happened when the neo-paganism movement happened is that the people who really wanted to focus on doing spells kind of went into the Wiccan category, and the people who really wanted to do lots of rituals went into the Druid, like group rituals, you know, with like very official kind of things, and then, you know, eating afterwards. I mean, the Wiccans eat too, but it seems like quite an important thing to do is to eat afterwards. It was all, I think it's all the same thing originally. So, but if you look for Wiccan stuff now, you're going to need like a Book of Shadows, for instance, which you would record all of your spells in. And might have even the magic of your family, if your family was traditionally magical. It would have like recipes and spells and different things in it, okay? And maybe it would be a journal for some people too. It depends on how you look at it.
Are there any like artifacts of that from the past?
I honestly, when you research this kind of subject, you get all these different things that don't go together. And I think it's because
it's very eclectic.
I'm gonna make a kind of a specific statement here, but I think it's because Catholicism took a lot of stuff out, like burned it, and literally like got rid of evidence of things. I'm not saying it was just Catholicism. Could have been some other people, you know, Romans and people that were interested in conquering the peoples, and controlling them.
Romans are generally pretty permissive people.
Huh?
In that level, they were pretty permissive.
The Romans?
Yeah, there's like religion.
Yeah, I don't think they like burned a lot of books or anything.
Yeah.
Definitely, once you get past the Middle Ages, there were so many books burned in the Middle Ages because the Catholic Church was in charge.
Yeah.
That there were actually some kind of an order of Druid priests that became Catholic priests in Ireland who actually continued to write things down in an artistic way throughout the Middle Ages, while everything else was getting, everything in Ireland was getting ransacked by Vikings, and everybody in the rest of mainland Europe didn't know how to write anymore, because they'd made sure that nobody knew how to write anymore.
Wow.
So it's interesting, but anyway, and even in Ireland, there's a fire to the goddess Bridget also that has been kept forever, like a sacred flame.
Really?
And it's been, tended forever. I'm not sure it's been on fire. I don't know what the actual specifics of it are as far as the flame itself, but it's a place that has had a flame of Bridget, and there's a well of Bridget too. And those places used to be guarded by Druid priestesses who later on became nuns of Catholic religion, and Bridget herself became, the Catholics made all of the gods and goddesses into saints, usually.
Yeah.
So that the people could keep, being Catholics and not have to, be, secretly worshiping Bridget, So there's a sacred flame of Bridget, and nuns still tend it, I think. And there's a well, too. And that is actually Bridget's two main elements. You've got a lot of things associated with elements in these kinds of things. These, I feel like, are we hot? We can turn the air conditioner.
I think it's all right.
It's warm in your skin.
Are you? Oh.
Yes.
It's subjective.
Yeah, it was up to 78. I don't know if it's actually
Oh, wow.
78.
That
I
is
don't think
hot.
it's actually 78, but still. Okay, so as far as Druidry, we talked about the Vade in that link. We talked about the neo-pagan movement. It was mostly, I'm just going to give you these two names because they're the ones credited with the neo-pagan movement. And it's not a big deal. It's not like you have to remember them or anything. But Gerald Gardner was a part of the ancient Druid folklore society. There were these societies of men, okay, in the British Isles that had kind of, their names had changed. These groups, the names of the groups had changed throughout the years, but they kind of maintained some knowledge of the old religion, I think. And it was very, I think there was a lot of corruption and kind of interpretation, but still, there was some thread that goes through the whole of history, actually. And Ross Nichols is the other one. He was a poet, and these guys got together in the 50s. And so basically, excuse me, this guy was interested in the Druid thing and part of this society, whatever that means, right? And this guy was a poet, and they got together and they realized they both really loved this whole idea of what was before Christian era in Ireland. I don't think that even at that time that most people had any idea what that meant. But they, I think, did some research and ended up writing a book called Witchcraft Today in 1954. I'm getting all really super historical, but that was the first book that was the beginning of the neo-pagan movement, so to speak. And that heralded the popularization of Wicca and Druidry, actually, again. But I think that most people that are into it now, especially Druidry, I feel are into it because there's some connection, that some feeling that there's some truth there, and there's some connection to their ancestors too. Because a lot of the earth-based religions and the other cultures have been maintained and preserved better, And I think that at a certain point, a lot of, people of Celtic origin were like, well, I know that we had something too. Like, I can feel it, So I think that there was that movement to go back to whatever was originally there before all this other, very male-based kind of thing. So, and we all know about the hippies and, in the 60s and how everybody, like, they made a point as far as, these guys made a point, especially on the OBOD website, that, after World War II, people were looking for an earth-based religion that was peaceful, that wasn't going to, was going to give you some understanding of, the material existence of just being here and how things used to be when we were an agricultural society before an industrial society. And I think also an important point about that is that it has to do with the body and not transcending the body. Not like a spirituality where you transcend the body and pretend like the body is sin or is something other than spirit. In Druidry and Wicca, we actually celebrate the body as being sacred. So that's a big difference too. Okay. All right. So Celts went to Ireland, Scotland, Wales, France, Spain, and some other places, England a little bit too. There are even some Celts, I think, in Holland. It kind of depends on, who you talk to, I think, but they've traveled all over Europe and established societies, especially in these places. And I think that Druidry goes back before them even. I think that there's some tie to Druidry to the Picts, and the Picts were before the Celts in Ireland, we know. But generally speaking, everybody thinks of Druidry as a Celtic religion, and so we know where that is now. And yeah.
So that probably occurred, what, a couple hundred years BC or a few hundred years or so?
Yeah, the thing is, okay, I think it was way before all of that, but the Romans, that's when the Romans would have encountered it, right?
Right.
So
now, is there, you said that everything's pretty sketchy, but is there any text that has, like, the most ancient teachings before Christ?
No. Because Druidry was an oral tradition, as far as we know.
Okay.
There are a lot of myths that have been written down, and actually those myths are almost equivalent, I think, to a religious text, because if you know how to study myth and really study myth in a deep way, that there's actually a different meaning for different states of consciousness in myth, that there is actually a good amount of myth that comes out of these Celtic cultures, actually, that is written down now. So that's what I would look for if you're looking for that, because as far as, like, tenets of the religion, I mean, you're going to find books that have been written since 1954 about it, yeah. And I don't think they're entirely, I don't think that they are, yeah.
I'm crazy to hate this.
Yeah, come on in. Yeah. I don't think that they're inaccurate, but we can't prove that they're accurate. And you really, I think, have to use your own intuition and your own feeling about what is true for you, Like what really.
So those cultures prior to the Romans, they weren't
Yes.
cultures with written language.
No, they were not unwritten language culture.
So the Romans really would have recorded that.
They ended up, being conquered by the Romans and then the Catholics, and they ended up learning how to, like, write, but actually, in the Middle Ages, hardly anyone was allowed to write or knew how to write, so, I welcome questions, by the way. We're kind of over, like, history of, Wicca and Druidry, and that's what we're talking about. And I want to give you some flyers later, but, and I went over my personal journey a little bit, but we're going to get to the 8 seasonal festivals and the actual holiday that is today, pretty soon. And then after some questions, we'll go and do a ritual if people want to. I mean, I'm assuming everybody wants to. And we have some awesome food, too. Okay. Let's see what is... Okay, so this is what Romans wrote down, okay, when they found Druids. I don't really want to take this off because I feel like this might be useful to you guys. What Romans wrote down when they found Druids is things like, okay, these people do human sacrifice. There's very little record of what that means. So I'd be careful to make your own interpretations about it, because definitely in neo-paganism we do not condone human sacrifice, okay? But I think that it also has to do with the idea of sacrifice. I think that when you get into, like, okay, why would people do that, that you should really start thinking about, well, what does sacrifice mean? Because to give something up for a greater thing is what you're doing. And there's an idea of sacrifice for sure. And there's a lot of ritual. There's the idea of magic being something that from your personal consciousness, from your personal power, that you can affect change in the world without even necessarily doing an outward action, right? Nowadays, I mean, things that I do to help people change their beliefs are almost like this, guys. Because if you're working with the belief realm, if you're working with your mental body, then you're working very subtly with magic, actually. Okay.
Yes.
See, I could just get excited about that. Okay, so then, you have a lot of healing practices involving herbs, just like every other indigenous culture ever. And I think Romans even wrote down that they were a little intimidated by Druid priests because they thought they could shapeshift. There's also mention, I think, of the 5-element concept.
Shape-shifting is just being able to take the form of different...
Yeah, so shape-shifting has to do with, they see priests that they actually felt could become, like that they had some evidence, from their eyes, could actually take shapes of animals, usually. Is what
Like a werewolf or something.
Yeah, like different animals in order to disguise themselves or go places that they needed to go. And then people made mention in some of the very few texts that exist of Druids being able to change the weather, which would be up there with magic, right? And let's see, so a lot of people, so we know that there was an Ogm or an Ogm alphabet that has to do with different kinds of trees. Druids had a big place in their heart for trees. Trees were like the temple of of nature. So even though I said it's according to a lot of sources it was an oral tradition, you do have this Ogam alphabet exists and there are writings, I think, but it's really hard to find stuff like this. It's a great idea if you want to do research. Call me up sometime and tell me what you find because it's a difficult area to research and find concrete things. But definitely there's an alphabet, and you can write your name in Ogam and stuff now.
I thought it wasn't a written tradition. How's there an alphabet?
That's what I'm saying, is like there was this alphabet. Now each symbol was a symbol of a tree.
Was it proto writing?
So apparently it was some kind of writing, but if you can imagine that each symbol is a tree name, it's not the kind of writing that we have right now, Mm-hmm. It's not an abstract form of writing in that way.
It's more like hieroglyphical.
Yeah, it's a little bit more like hieroglyphics maybe. I'm not an expert on languages at all, so that's definitely not one of my strong points. But like I said, if you ever do any research, call me up and tell me what you find. And okay, there's a general belief in Druidry and Wicca of the little people. We can laugh about this, but we only know what they are from the fact of the culture that our culture is based in a lot of ways on this culture. So it's like, it's a commonplace thing now. Like everybody knows what you're talking about when you say fairies. But this is a belief that there's little people that may or may not be invisible, depending on what they want to do, that live in, and actually the technical term for them is, and this is another thing that you could it's controversial, all of it, right? You could say that they're all the Siddha, or that they just, only some of them are. It depends on who you talk to. And they live in these guys especially live in mounds, and some of them are said to live in trees. Now, that, I think, is when we're talking about especially elementals, which we're getting back into neo-paganism again. Elementals have to do with these guys up here, and generally, this is something that goes back, this is in the Veda and other places too, that all of these elements have little beings associated with them. And that a lot of, people in New Age community now believe, right, that crystals have spirits, that different things like that have spirits. The idea is that nothing on Earth is not imbued with spirit in some way. And if you have these elements, that you would have beings that are responsible for kind of helping to maintain it, those elements. And in Sanskrit, you might call them devas. And I mean, really, like, when you go into New Age literature, you find stuff about people who keep portals, for instance, like people who just stand there and like are the portal people, and people who are messengers, and people who have different jobs and other planes of existence, right? So I just think that that elementals is a pretty basic concept, actually, to this whole system of thought. So if you want to ask more about that, we can talk about it later. Okay, so what they knew for sure was that the Druids were, usually, they had gone through a whole lot of training, like some kind of scary things even, like being put in a body bag all night, stuff like that. Apparently some of them had to go through these tests, and they're very similar to shamanic ritual that we see in Native Americans too. There's a lot of correlation actually to the Native Americans with some of this stuff. So some Druids apparently sat in a tree or in some kind of enclosure, kind of body bag, to symbolize death and go through some kind of shamanic thing involving visualization and having visions about what their future should be, what their path is, what their function is, that kind of thing. And by the time they got to be called a Druid, they had gone through many levels of training, and it was actually very organized, according to my sources.
Do they use substances like other shamanic cultures?
Yeah. And actually, there's a whole tradition of, there's myths about, or ideas at least, about female priestesses. Scrying is another way of telling the future. Like, if you looked into a crystal ball, that would be scrying. If you looked into a bowl of water or into the lake, most of the time Druids scryed in water. And you would, let your left brain go, and your right brain then would take over and give you some images, and you would use your intuition to interpret them. So it's a very female, intuition-based place.
How do you spell that?
Scrying?
Yeah.
Scrying.
Okay.
And so Druids were priests, judges, arbiters, agricultural, calendar keepers, kind of. They kind of had the farmer's almanac that farmers look at. They were like the keepers of that too. They would tell the farmers when was a good time to plant, that kind of thing. Also, they had to do with keeping law and order, actually. And they did all the religious rituals, so.
So they didn't have an indoor sacred space. It was all outside based.
It was always
So
tree based, actually. Yeah.
So in a community, they had druids, but they would then gather outside in some kind of space.
Yeah, it was tree based, as far as that the outdoors was the most sacred place, and these stone circles, right, have been associated with druids, but there's also some people who say that for sure Stonehenge was not built by druids. I think that's because if you look at how big Stonehenge stones are, it's just humanly kind of impossible to get them to where they are. So I'm just saying it's possible that there's something even more supernatural
Mysterious.
going on there. But druids definitely used trees and stone circles. So the I keep writing things in different places now. The what do you call it? The grove, the sacred grove is a concept.
For the
And
labyrinth?
when you did, oh, good question about labyrinths. But let's first do. So when you did a ritual, you would make a circle, and quite often that would be within another circle of trees or within another circle of stones. Okay. When you do that, as far as when we get into magical occult knowledge, when you make a circle of anything that is earth element based, you're creating like a vacuum kind of in the middle. There's a border that you're creating, a structure, and that can be used in a lot of ways, magically speaking. So when that energy cannot go outside of that circle, you're going to amplify energy in there. Do you guys kind of get that? We can go over that again later. But so you were asking about what did you say?
First one, but
Labyrinths. Labyrinths were probably used by druids or Wiccans or whatever you want to call the original that everything came from. Definitely, it's another mysterious subject. All of Western culture is like doesn't have records really compared to some of the Eastern cultures that really we can kind of see, how everything was structured. In Western culture, so much stuff has been destroyed that you can only kind of guess, but I think definitely labyrinths were used. Labyrinths were used, we know, by the Romans, and we know by the time we get to like the Middle Ages and even Victorian times, people still had labyrinths in their yard, So the thing about labyrinths, I think, so we're getting into Hillary's interpretation of stuff now, okay? I like that part. Like, the thing about labyrinths is that as you walk through a labyrinth, you usually go on a path to the center, and then you go back the other way out to the outside of it again. And that, if you look at Eastern forms of meditation, for instance, like TM, where there's an inward stroke and an outward stroke, that's a consciousness ritual. And I think that in Western culture, it was just more physical. I think that people would walk a labyrinth like how someone would meditate in Eastern culture. It's just my kind of interpretation. But I think that definitely you're going to have your mind quiet down, and you're kind of physically enacting something that actually happens in consciousness all the time. There's a cycle in consciousness of like going in and coming back out, and the going in is going towards greater and greater silence, and the going out is going towards greater and greater activity. Okay? So
I think it would cause anxiety.
What?
Getting lost. I think.
Oh, the labyrinth. Well, the good thing about labyrinths, see, I think is I have friends in Wilton who have a labyrinth in their backyard, and it's awesome. Too bad we can't all go on a field trip, but there's a big old rose quartz in the middle too, which by the way corresponds, usually people who know about gems, that corresponds to your heart chakra, right? Mm-hmm. And when you walk their labyrinth, you're not confused because it's not a huge labyrinth. You're not like worrying that you can't get out because they don't actually have like big hedgerows or anything. You're just, there's little markers, there's little rocks on the ground. But when you walk a labyrinth, you know where you're going. You do it so often, I think, as a ritual, as a practice, that you know where you're going. You know you're going to come back out. So that's the freedom of it, is that you lose all of that needing to be up here, like needing to be alert. You're just doing it to go through it, like you would do I think ideally how you would do Tai Chi or yoga or something, because you wouldn't be like thinking, I'm supposed to be doing it this way, right? Hopefully. Like, that's the goal of yoga, right? Is to kind of like get to that place where you're not thinking so much, right? Joe's like our major yoga practitioner right at the moment. But, so, those are the things that I was talking about what Romans were about writing down, they were writing down stuff like human sacrifice and shape-shifting and that kind of stuff. And we know that the Druids were priests, judges, arbitrators, agricultural kind of officials, and that bards in Irish culture is an interesting subject too, because it does play into the Druid culture. The way that the order of bards, ovates, and druids does it is that you first take bardic training, then you take ovate training, which is more of a scientific thing almost, kind of, and then druid training would be even the deepest, darkest, mystical, magical school stuff.
So it's hierarchical in that way?
Yes. Bardic training, though, originally there were these bards who, that's all they did, okay? And we know this for sure because this kept going on for a while, actually. This is like one of the more surviving traditions in Ireland, is that people would go around and not have a home. They just take their musical instrument with them, okay? And they would go around and tell stories and play music for people, and that was all they did. And everyone was responsible for taking them into their house in a hospitable way and giving them as much food and drink as possible. And and then learning from their stories and their song. Like, that was, the story was the left brain part and the song was the right brain part, and it was considered a teaching. And if you really go into that, especially in that way that you would with your heart, because it's poetic and there's that inspiration of the heart to really, open with something artistic like song and, music, dance, poetry, those things actually kind of inspire us and open our heart, and that's why some of the teachings can go in easier, I think. And and it creates a culture too. It creates what do you call it? Kind of like goals to aspire to, I think, the hero ideal. You have like stuff going on in the consciousness of the people then that has to do with the stories and the art, right? And when you have an art-based society like that, art becomes actually very important, and artists get at least food, shelter, and drink, right? Which we don't really have anymore. But so, okay. So that's like all the boring stuff, you guys. Let's talk about all the seasonal festivals and the festival of the day that we're on now.
Can I ask one question before you
Unless anybody has any other questions about this stuff.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I'm asking
Yeah.
questions, but so you mentioned goddess, but didn't talk much about God. So how does
Okay,
God
well
show up in that?
let's talk about that again, actually. So, God and goddess, it depends on which tradition you're going to and what holiday you're into. Usually they're both referred to as important, okay, because you have a divine masculine and you have a divine feminine side to each one of you, no matter what gender you are, right? And they're actually important to be in balance, both of them. But goddess is referred to as the ultimate in the way that God is referred to as the ultimate in Western traditions.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, this is Western tradition. I mean, in Judeo-Christian traditions. That is the ultimate concept of mother and being nurtured and loved. So love, in a sense, would be put above even spiritual attainment of some like kind of. They didn't have. I think that they had concepts of enlightenment like the Indians did and the Buddhists did, but I think that there was a predominance of this divine feminine feeling that love is the most important thing. And if you're, it's just, it's, you can see it for yourself. I mean, it's very experimental. I mean, go home and try it, I guess, it's like how you feel when you pray to God, how you feel when you pray to goddess. There's a slightly different quality there. And they're both important probably to all of us. But I think it's interesting because I think that some cultures actually keep divine masculine qualities for the world more, and some cultures keep divine feminine qualities. And I don't think that that's necessarily like a bigoted thing. Even it's just like how the culture developed and was able to the thing they're able to give, kind of, you know. So let's talk about seasonal holidays and autumn equinox. Unless you guys need any of this, I'm going to erase now. Any other questions about that stuff? Oh, the god is sometimes referred to as a horned god. It was considered in Druidry that the goddess is eternal because she goes through these cycles. You know, first we've got this goddess, then this goddess, then this one. Or this is an aspect of the major goddess, and this is an aspect, and this is an aspect. God, on the other hand, is considered to be born from her, grow to maturity, mate with her, and then sacrifice himself and die, and then come back and be born again right before Christmas, where we celebrate, right, the birth of Jesus.
Mm-hmm.
Well, winter solstice is the birth of the divine child, which is also called, the name for it, in the Mabon.
What type of animal does it emulate? Is it a horned bull, or is it a horned ram, or just a horned human?
The horned god is symbolic of the hunter god. That he, like, at Beltane time, that we're going to actually get into this a year, so let's do that. So, at the springtime, when the male would come into maturity, and you'd have the maiden, but the maiden would be, like, you know, getting older, then, and the divine mating kind of is considered to have happened around May 1st, which would be Beltane, which is also called May Day now, right, where they celebrate big phallic symbols, where there's, like, a maypole, and we're all, you know, dancing around the phallic symbol. That is originally Beltane, and Beltane was all about sex, actually, but in a divine way, a sacred way, and there's a lot of stuff, there's a lot of other stuff involved. It's a very fire element holiday, and there's a lot of fires involved, and people jumping through fires to kind of test their immortality, not test their immortality, like, it was pretty much like, you know you're gonna get through, but jumping through fires to kind of show that there's, you know,
Virility.
it was about fertility, but it was also
Virility, like.
Yeah, like that you should get your body up to a good place where you could jump through a fire. Also, you know, I know I'm sounding a little bit like schizophrenic at this point, but like the fire thing is a birth and rebirth thing always. You know, I mean, a death and rebirth thing, because fire kills you and has that divine spark that is considered to bring consciousness, like to bring humans back to this plane, kind of. So anyway, the horned god mates with the mating goddess or whatever on May 1st, but not all god is considered horned. There's also the green man, who's a little bit kind of, at this point, he looks really impish, like he's a fairy or whatever. I don't know that he was a fairy originally. The green man is kind of symbolic of the summer, and he sacrifices himself on this day. He dies, so that we may continue living. So maybe that is where the sacrifice thing came from. And in fact, in Samhain, we do talk about sacrifice more. Samhain is where Halloween came from originally, and that's one of the most fun holidays, I think, in Druidry and Wicca. The most fun holidays usually are Beltane and Samhain, because they're also considered the times of the year when the veil between the worlds is the thinnest. So you would talk to your ancestors and your fairies and different people on different planes of existence on those times. And if you feel what the world is like during those dates, you can feel a difference. Especially around Halloween, right? If you ever try communicating, you know, with your ancestors around Halloween, I think it's more fun and easier. But it's not like that's the only time you could do it, you know. But that's usually what you would do is you communicate with your ancestors on Halloween on Samhain, and then on Beltane you would communicate more with the little people because there's that energy on Beltane of like impishness and mischievousness and that kind of fun fairy energy, which is very emphasizes joy and the trickster archetype, I would say. So, okay. So we are right now on autumn equinox. There are 2 equinoxes in the year, right? And this is the time that there are equal hours, equal minutes of day and night. Okay? And that happens again in spring on spring equinox. And that's the only 2 times it happens, right? So these are the most balanced times of the year. And actually, as far as like magic goes, or if you're making resolutions, you know, that you want to, or you're trying to do manifestations, some people use these times of the years to do that because there's a very balanced energy. You would have a very balanced energy of masculine and feminine too, because the sun would be masculine and the moon would be feminine. So you'd have those both going on right now. So let's just after autumn equinox. This is also there's different names for it in. I think this is the Gaelic. So it's referred to in different ways, and I really like it when I remember my own pens because I hate these pens. So Alban Elfin or Min from hair, which I cannot say that I pronounce that correctly. So don't listen to how I said it. But after that you get Samhain, which I know I do pronounce correctly. But you spell it this way. Before it became Halloween, it was known as All Hallows Eve, right? Mm-hmm. Which was after it being known as Samhain. And then you get winter solstice, which is the exact half point between the equinoxes. Okay? So everything is pretty geometrical, which I think is important to note, that it wasn't like people were just sitting around using their intuition all the time. There was actually some observation of exactly, what measurements existed in time and space and how to make those very accurate. If you look at, Druids are credited with the whole Stonehenge thing. It might not be even something that they did, but if you look at those stone circles and temples of, there's places where there's like one small hole in a rock, and when on like a winter solstice or summer solstice, when the sun goes through that hole, it creates this whole geometrical thing that you wouldn't be able to see any other time of the year. There's a lot of places that are like that actually in the world, where they have structures like that that are good. So that's just food for thought, because that's some serious math, actually. Serious math. Okay, so that would be the equal point, and that would be the exact, what we would call the beginning of winter. And then you have, now it's the 21st, right, which is 4 days before Christmas. There's a lot of other Druid names for it too. We have Druid names like this, both of these, for all of them. And I'm just not going to go into all of them because you don't need to remember them probably, but if you want, you can ask me something and I can look it up for you. When we get to the beginning, the Groundhog Day, we call that Emok. It was also called, I think at one point it was called Bridget's Day, Groundhog Day, Candlemas by the Catholics. Okay, and Spring Equinox, which is usually the 21st also, or the 22nd of March. And then Beltane would be your next holiday. May 1st, May Day. And then after that, you would have summer solstice, which would be the beginning of summer, and exactly equidistant between spring and autumn. And then we'd have Lunasad, or the day of Lu. Lu is also another name for the green man. And there's other names for this. Lamas, which I think is more the Latin. And, let's see. Yeah. Okay, questions about that? That is the wheel of the year, also shown this way sometimes. And that would be where we get the pentagram that people wear for Wicca, right? And that would be also where so-called Satanists got their pentagram, because they do it the opposite way, upside down, I think. Which I think, okay, there's sacred geometry, right? A pentagram is sacred geometry. You can use symbols that have power in different ways, right? Like Hitler took the swastika from India and put it backwards. Which is exactly what Satanists did with this. I just think that's interesting. So then you put the different holidays here. This, I think, would be winter. Wait. I don't know. You do it. A Samhain here. You start a Samhain there. And you go. And there's only 5 here, so you do the equal parts. Like, these are the main. There's different holidays, right? There's the ones that are part of the calendar, like that we even put on our calendar now still, right? And then there's the other ones that are less known. And those you would put around, so you put 1, 2, 3, 4 around like this. So you go Samhain and then Imbolc like that. And it goes around. Anyway, the whole point is that with all your holidays on here, and it just keeps going around and around. And if you had a calendar like this, you could just move it, right? If your pop was like now, just move it all the time.
What's the last line? I can't read your writing.
Lunasad, sorry. It's Lugh.
Okay.
Nasad. I like that one better. Some people call it Lammas, or the day of Lu, the green man.
When is that?
That is the first harvest, which is August 1st.
August 1st.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah, so this...
Bridget's Day is in March, right?
So this is more like June 22nd, May 1st, we did that. Spring Equinox, March 21st or 22nd, right? Because the year is not the same every, like,
Right.
it's not exactly 365 days, it's 365 and a half or whatever.
Yeah.
And Imbolc is February 1st and 21st of December. And this, Samhain, is actually Celtic New Year, which I think is interesting, because many cultures have their New Year in the fall,
That's
not
interesting.
after Christmas.
Why?
Not all of them, but a lot of them.
How's that?
The Ethiopians, and there's some... there's some definitely African cultures that have their New Year at this time, too.
What's the thought process behind it?
The thought process is very interesting, right? Because it shows you how Druids think, and also it corresponds to the Vedic stuff too. You would be at the beginning of a year when you go into the dark half. So you'd have the dark half and the light half. Okay, so Ayurvedic people believe that the day starts when you go to sleep at night. It's the same concept with Druidry, okay? The year starts when you're at the darkest, most nothingness, void point of the year. I'm using terminology that's kind of spiritual, but you can ask me what it means if you want. Like, the the time where the veils are the thinnest between the worlds. It's the darkest. It's literally the darkest.
But no, the middle of winter is the darkest.
No, not true. This is literally the darkest. There's the most hours of darkness. The winter solstice is when it starts going back the other way. Like we're still, it's getting darker and darker, and then when you get to winter solstice, it starts getting lighter and lighter after that.
Okay, I thought like that was the time when the day was the shortest.
This is technically the holiday when the day would be the shortest. This it would keep getting shorter until this, but this is celebrated as the beginning of the light, because after this day it
stops getting shorter.
It starts getting
Longer.
lighter and lighter
Gotcha.
for longer.
Okay.
So it's confusing. I'm sorry, I didn't say that the best way.
Yeah.
Any other questions about this? So the dark half is, we are now entering the dark half. Autumn equinox, Samhain, winter solstice, I think, and then spring and Beltane and summer solstice and Lunicid. My writing's getting kind of bad, but does everybody get it? Questions about anything before I erase? We are almost done with this educational part. You've done very well of sitting through it. Okay. So, it's funny because you don't know who you're going to get to these classes, and a lot of times I would assume I would get the people more interested in the education, but I don't feel that's true probably with this group. I think you guys are probably more like into like, let's do the ritual and have some food. But autumn equinox is the festival of equality of day and night, like I said. Okay, now my writing's really sloppy now. Okay. And it is the second harvest. There are 3 harvests in the Western Hemisphere, right? You would start harvesting on Lunicid, actually, traditionally, in this culture. And then you would harvest again here. And then your last harvest would be Samhain. And that's it, man. After that, you better have enough food in your house for the winter, right? Or in your stores, your barns. Because that's why Samhain always has that creepy feeling. Because you're going into the winter and, you know, sometimes people died in the winter. Because you'd better have enough food, is all I'm saying. So, I mean, this is a very, like, you can look at Druidry in this very material way like this, or you can look at it in a very spiritual way, too. You can do both. Okay, but I think it's very interesting. I think it's important to note, you know, like, today would be the real Thanksgiving in Druidry. Because there's these different feelings, these different themes to each part of the year and to each holiday, right? And if you remember those by, you know, they would remember them by doing a ritual or having a celebration. If you remember those themes, then you actually tap into an important thing in consciousness that helps you kind of maintain balance and like be in more unity maybe with what's happening in the Earth cycle. So we would give thanks right now, even though this is the second harvest, not the third, but this would be our real Thanksgiving. We would give thanks right now because we would have some good grain harvested by this point, and like, yay, thank you to the elementals and the fairies and the green men for giving us this food, right? For our life being able to keep going. Pretty basic. There's that sacrifice that the green man makes today so that we can keep living, because he is kind of the spirit of vegetables, and we start eating a bunch of vegetables and bread, usually on this holiday. I like to put in, you know, what the what the kind of like foods and herbs of the season are. I always like that part. Okay, so
So that's why we have stuffing. Because
Yeah.
it's bread.
yeah, actually, probably. And you know, all of those traditional Thanksgiving foods, look at them. They're there to like give you some substance to take you through the winter because your body, you know, you're eating like potatoes and really heavy foods. And traditionally that was for a reason. You'd want to like pork up so that you could survive and be warm. And you know, in the winter we know from Chinese medicine and Ayurveda that your digestive power actually goes up in the winter because the temperature goes down. Your body regulates on that. Your body helps maintain a certain. It knows that you need more food. It knows that you need more energy. Actually, it's colder outside. So your digestive fire goes up. You're able to eat more things, and you're also not going outside and exercising as much. You're probably more inside hibernating in the winter, right? So there's a whole lot of things that go together that all make sense here, but they are definitely a whole area of study. So we would thank the sun too for all the sunlight that created all of the fruits and vegetables that we've been eating and all the flowers that are about to die, because this is about the last time of like enjoying flowers at this point. And so there's like a bittersweet feeling. Okay, this is where we're getting into our right brain again, right? Most of us have a feeling, not everybody, but usually most of us can kind of observe how the air changes around this time of year. I don't know if you guys noticed it, but I definitely did, like, even a couple days ago. But today it was really pronounced because we had that first rain yesterday. And that's, like, a big deal because it changes all of the, you know, it changes the whole pressure system and everything and what the air feels like, right? So the reason why we have this, there's this difference in our weather, but it's also a difference in our feeling and our consciousness and everything, right? We're going into the dark side of the year, so we're going into the unmanifest, the darkness. This is the time that we would now start celebrating the crone, the old woman. Okay, especially today and Samhain are celebrations of the crone and what the old person who's like more nearing death has to give us instead of just what the young person coming out of childhood would have to give us. This is about letting go of what you don't need because you don't want to take it into the winter. And I interpret that because you guys got my health model mostly, except for I'll give you my health model, but I interpret that to mean that if you've got beliefs or emotions now that can be let go of, this is a good time to do it. Also, any excess energy that you didn't want in your life, people that you don't want, things that you don't want, like extra things in your house, you would start getting rid of them now. Like too many clothes, you know, you go give them to the Goodwill. There's a lot of different ways you can interpret this, right?
So it happens both in the fall and the spring equinox, because there's the whole thing of spring
Yeah, there's
cleaning.
a whole spring cleaning thing. Yes, it happens both. I think because there's that equal balance place, and it's like the pause in between scenes, kind of is how I think about it. You know, like if you had a play or whatever, it's like you're in the darkness for a sec in between. You know what? Just when you go in to do the scene on stage, right? Once you're there, you got to do it, man. That's it, right? So you're committed and you're there, and then when the scene's over, you know, the spring equinox would be more like before you go to do the scene, probably, and the autumn equinox would be after. I'm like crying because it was so awesome, and now you have to miss all your cast members, remember? But so there's a lot of concepts that you can work with in this time of the year, and that you can do spells with, or you can do rituals with, or you can do, you know, other consciousness techniques to help yourself at this time of the year with those themes in mind. I think themes are the important thing. In the traditional culture, they would have a big festival feast that would include all the finest foods and decorations. So, everybody would wear, like, I brought my velvet thing because everybody would wear, you know, your best fabrics, right? And I also have my druid cloak here because this is what druids would wear to do a ritual. But anyway, so there's also colors for all these times of the year. I mean, it really goes with your kind of common sense, actually, but it's cool to think about because it's fun, it's creative, and you get in touch with more where you are in the year, which is useful because these cycles, these like yearly cycles actually happen all the time. It's holographic. They happen in every hour, every minute. They happen in your brain. They happen in your heart. They happen in your body, you know. So, those are the main themes. We're giving thanks and letting go. And the crone would also be called like the Kalik or the there's different goddesses associated with the crone, like Saradwen. The Dark Woman or the Great Queen are the ways of saying it. Okay, so a lot of cultures do not worship the Dark Woman anymore, right? That's a scary concept to male-dominated cultures. Especially because the patriarchy that we've been living in has not been enlightened patriarchy, right? It's like, you know, some pretty ignorant stuff happening. So, I'm just saying, Dark Woman, interesting cultural concept, right? And
so is that like in Hinduism they have Kali?
Kali, yeah, it's very similar, And actually, you could probably find it in other cultures too, but there's definitely a denial of it in the Judeo-Christian kind of culture. And you would put, this is just a fun little like thing that you can, there's little rituals you can do yourself to celebrate if you want to that are easy. One of them for autumn equinox is you put all sorts of, like, you put like a shrine at your door. The door is considered a portal to other realms in Druidry, any doorway. Mm-hmm. And to your house, it's the portal to your little world. So that's where you might put thanks to the fairies, the elementals, the green man, the sun, and those things. You would put maybe some flowers and some vegetables out. And, you know, when we put stuff out for Santa Claus on Christmas, that even comes from this. Because that was a very, I think because our Western culture is very based, is where, you know, this is the origins of it. And there was a lot of putting out food for fairies, or even people still sometimes, you know, pour a little alcohol on the ground for fairies now because I think it's become bastardized in that way. Like there's like a little bit of a corruption of the ancient. I mean, but even in so-called Celtic times, you would probably have some kind of ale or mead or something, and you know, your finest things is what you give the fairies and the elementals that are associated with the elements of space, air, fire, water, and earth. Those elements are what create your body and what create your food, so that's what you have to give thanks to.
I have a question that kind of transcends, actually goes back, I should say, but it has to do with patriarchy. Now, patriarchy emerged about 12,000 years ago, associated with agriculture, the first agricultural revolution, they believe.
Depends on who you talk to.
Yeah, true. And if you believe that, then basically, you know, it just had to do with control of resources and oppression of females by low-quality males, basically, and that's the rise of patriarchy.
Uh-huh.
Now, but this society seems to be, the Celts seem to be relatively
matriarchal. Good point.
Or were they matriarchal?
Yes.
Okay.
Yep. Thank you for bringing that up, actually, because there's some things that I was like not even. I think you can spell it this way.
Mm-hmm.
yeah, I didn't even get into some of these things because this is definitely an area of study you could go into in depth for quite a few hours. This is something that some people use their whole lifetime to study. So yeah, I mean, matriarchal culture, in the same way as other cultures have been traditional. I mean, you can say that Hebrews are traditionally patriarchal, and that isn't necessarily corrupt from the beginning. But the rest of Western society seems to have traditions that do not have, they don't put a sacredness into why you would have different roles. And anyway, I don't know how much we want to get into all this.
No, that sounds really
Yeah.
interesting. But actually, I would like to ask another question. If it's a matriarchal society, and I didn't know that it was, but if you look back to our closest living ancestors, bonobos and chimpanzees, perfect case study in a matriarchal, patriarchal societies, chimpanzees, common chimpanzees being patriarchal, bonobos being matriarchal. The common bond in the patriarchal species is violence, basically, and then they have some form of democracy, but they're pretty violent. And then bonobos are female sex. They're very much female sex oriented, so that bonds the females together, and they're far more powerful than the males. They don't have ovulatory crypsis, so there isn't any adaptive selection like we do in our species. In fact, they don't have monogamy or anything like that. Very, very few mammals do. But it's sort of interesting. I mean, if you think about a matriarchal species, obviously, or some matriarchal society, right after patriarchy emerged, presumably, and a species get ovulatory crypsis, so you can get to conceal the time of ovulation, you can still get married and all that, those underpinnings. But was there a rise in sexuality, especially amongst women? Was
Okay.
it open, sort of like the 60s?
So,
do we know anything?
No. I
Or is that a
wouldn't
trend
correlate it to
now?
the 60s, but
Maybe
don't get me
in
started on the
practice,
60s. Okay.
Is there an underpinning of that, especially
Okay,
amongst
this-
women? I mean, I'm not so concerned about
Okay, so this is my
heterosexual
interpretation
sex,
of
but
what I've studied along with
females
what I...
and lesbianism.
Okay, so this is what my interpretation of what I've studied along with what I actually feel intuitively, so I'm not going to say that this is what you would find if you were researching, depending on who you're talking to. I feel that for sure we know that there are hand fasting ceremonies with Druids that were a form of marriage, okay? As far as I know, there were at least two different kinds of marriage. One of them was that you would get married for a year, and that's why some neo-pagans even practice this now, again, because it's like a practice marriage. This correlates to some of the stuff that we've studied about, ancient Lemurians and everything too, but then you'd have a real marriage where you can't get out no matter what. But Druids, according to most sources, always had the Druid priest was responsible for doing divorces, and they actually were fine with divorce. It was not at all considered free love sex society. No, not that I know of. That has major damaging implications, actually, in a lot of ways. It really does, because once your heart is not involved in what your body is doing, then to me, that would go against what this is trying to teach. What this is trying to teach is that our body is the same as our heart, which is the same as our mind, which is the same as our consciousness.
So I'm really more focused on the lesbian, not the heterosexual, because I don't really believe in that either. But I mean, I'm trying to pin down the matriarchal construct in terms of lesbianism, because that is an underpinning in our closest ancestors, that sexuality between females, and that openness to sexual pleasure. And if you look in our species, in the studies, females tend to do better together, even if you get over the stereotype. They tend to achieve orgasm a lot quicker than penile penetration.
Sexually, yes. We don't know that necessarily in their relationships. So
right.
More, as far as I know, everybody's got the same relationship.
So I did want to throw the free sex in there. That was sort of
okay. Well, so what I know as far as what I studied is that, everybody was considered to need pleasure, and that you would definitely have a woman would be kind of the one in charge of the family in terms of like what decisions got made. This is very like who knows kind of subject, because as far as my feeling of it is like that, you know, your grandma or whatever is the one in charge of your family and making major decisions. But as far as Druid traditions, I mean, people were considered to have their own individual free will. A lot of the concepts that are now starting to become like normal are what were considered normal then too, as far as I can tell. Like, we had divorce. There was marriage and divorce, and there were male and female. I mean, the thing is, you've got God and goddess always. So to say that you can take one of them out, you're gonna have them within every person. But I just think I don't know that there was any prejudice against anyone doing what they wanted to in terms of love and procreation, as far as I can tell. I mean, I don't think there's any actually problem with homosexuality that I've heard of.
Okay.
But that doesn't mean that they encouraged it either. I don't really know. I can't tell you about homosexuality, but I can tell you that they definitely worship both God and goddess, and that's the important thing, that we have those both within all of us. Yeah.
So you're saying that in like Druid communities or like in like Celtic culture that it was more matriarchal base?
That's my feeling, and that's what you would, I think, if you researched, I don't know what you would find exactly. Definitely in neo-pagan religions, you're going to have a predominance of goddess stuff, actually. It's an earth-based religion. The earth is considered feminine. It goes through cycles. It even goes through kind of like a menstrual cycle. The earth goes through, all these things, and it's considered the mother, and so you would treat it as the mother, just like in a lot of African religions and a lot of other indigenous religions. And
what's interesting though is that in a lot of these indigenous religions that are earth-based, still like the shamans or the spiritual practitioners, not practitioners but authorities are male.
But that is not true in Druidry.
So what I wonder is, and also in these traditional cultures, I think they're pretty much across the board very fixed gender roles. So it surprised me if it was both male and female.
The further back you go, the less fixed the gender roles actually are. There are accounts, even in like Roman things, of islands of Druid priestesses, where there were only Druid priestesses on the islands. Now, there's also a whole myth of Avalon. You guys probably have heard of that one. There's like some popular, if you read like the myths of Avalon, it's like a whole Druid feminist take on the Arthurian legends. So from my education and my intuition put together, the islands, though, the temples that were full of just women, it's not that they were sexually pleasuring each other all the time. It's that the male priests would come in and do sacred sex acts with them.
That's right, like certain Hindu traditions.
Or just even commoners on like on special special holidays like Beltane. Even anyone, I think, could mate with a priestess, but it had to be organized from the higher ranks, though. It was people in charge that were organizing that. It wasn't like, just like chaotic or anything.
So what seems like very likely is that there were maybe different functions for the male and female druids.
Yes.
So very kind of defined spiritual functions.
Yeah, there were definitely male druids.
Gender.
There were definitely female druids. They might have been called something different, like priestesses or whatever. But I mean, who cares? Because it's a different language. So, and the important thing is that we definitely know that they mated and had children, even though they were priests or priestesses. The priestesses would have the children, and they would be the one who was in charge of the child. The male who mated with them did not get to claim ownership of the child, which is interesting because it's definitely a matriarchal situation. And Yeah, and I'm sure that was tragic for some guys, but like that was that's a certain religious practice we're talking about too. That's like priestesses didn't go around mating with people all the time. It was like certain one holiday a year or whatever, and people that were chosen to have children for that community.
Very
So
ritualized, probably.
it was very organized. Yeah, it wasn't like crazy. Any other questions? Because we can go do a ritual. Okay, let's go ahead and turn off that. Thank you for watching. Check out my website if you guys want at www.hillary'shealthelements.com.